Today I'll be reading to you The Teacher's March, How Selma's Teachers Changed History, written by Sandra Neal Wallace and Rich Wallace. This book was during around 1965 when the Civil Rights Act was going on. And this is Selma's somewhere in Alabama. And yeah. So, The Teacher's March. Reverend F.D. Reese taught science at H.B. Hudson High School, but his favorite subject was freedom. He believed that everyone was a first-class citizen, just like the Constitution stated. To be treated as less than equal, that just wasn't right. So, does anybody know the word reverend? No? Okay. Reverend is someone who is like a speaker at like a religious setting or just towards a group of people. With the fire in his eyes, Reverend Reese led marchers to the courthouse to register to vote. Troublemakers, that's what the police called the marchers. Reverend Reese knew that was a lie. The marchers just wanted to vote like everybody else, but in Selma, Alabama, segregation kept black people and white people apart, and billy clubs kept black people from voting. Sheriff Clark's cheeks boiled red whenever he spotted Reverend Reese and the marchers. His deputies blocked the marble steps of the courthouse. The sheriff swung his club at the Reverend like he was a baseball, and that kept the most people away. Even if they made it into the courthouse, the Reverend knew what would happen. You must take a voting test, a test impossible to pass. How many drops of water are in the Alabama River? How could anyone answer a question like that? Reverend Reed pulled his trench coat over his bruises and kept on marching and talking about freedom. He had to find a way to make their voices heard. He needed a triumphant idea. Now, do you think that's right, what the officers are doing to the African American people here in Alabama? No, you're right. It's not really right. And hopefully we'll see that there's a change. Oh, I forgot to say to you guys, make sure you're paying attention to your plot diagrams that I passed out to you, because we'll be going over them at the end of class, or at the end of this book. So make sure you have your climax, which is the beginning part, rising action, which is everything that leads into what you guys think the halfway of the book is, falling action, everything that leads to the exposition, the resolution, which is the ending or like the summary of the book. Walking through the school one day, the Reverend found his idea in every classroom. What if the teachers marched? Not just one teacher like him, but hundreds of teachers, leaders. That's what people called the teachers. The teachers were the somebodies of the community. College-educated, shiny leather shoes, suits and Sunday brooches, 7 days a week. No group like that had marched for freedom before. If the teachers marched, people would notice and change would come. Do we all think change is going to come here? All right, we'll see, possibly. But in that summer of 1964, a judge declared marching and talking about voting rights against the law in Selma. Don't get involved in that mess, some people warned. It's too dangerous, and that stopped meetings and marchers to the courthouse. How would Reverend Reese convince the teachers to march now? He searched for a glorious opportunity. Just before Christmas, he huddled by the TV watching the great civil rights leader, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., talk about freedom. The Reverend's face lit up like a Christmas tree. Who better than Dr. King to turn things around and help convince the teachers to march? That night, Reverend Reese wrote a letter to Dr. King, inviting him to Selma. He signed it, "Yours for better citizens." Some people thought, there's no way Dr. King will come to Selma, but Dr. King said yes. Some preachers feared they would be arrested if Dr. King spoke in their churches about voting rights, but not the pastor of Brown Chapel. He gave Reverend Reese permission to have Dr. King speak at his church. When the day arrived, clouds hung so heavy they covered the steeples of Brown Chapel. Reverend Reese worried that nobody would show up. The night before, a soldier home on leave for Christmas had thrown a smoke bomb near the church, hoping to scare Dr. King away. The bomb didn't scare anyone away. 700 people squeezed into the brown chapel waiting for Dr. King. 15-year-old Joyce Parrish sat in her usual row with her mother, Too Sweet. When Dr. King swung through the doors of Brown Chapel, Joyce and Too Sweet leapt to their feet and clapped. Dr. King said people shouldn't be afraid of being arrested. They should go to jail by the thousands to defend the right to vote. And he wasn't just talking about committed marches like Reverend Reese. He meant everybody in Brown Chapel. At the next meeting, Reverend Reese spoke to the teachers filling the church pews. He told them about his triumphant idea. We're not just teachers in the classroom, but leaders in the community, he proclaimed. People are looking to us to give leadership. We are going to march. The teachers fidgeted as if they hadn't heard. Some sat still as statues. When times got this quiet, Reverend Reese always said you could hear a rat walk on cotton. I'll believe it when I see it, grumbled a churchgoer. So what do we think sat like a statue means? It's a figurative speech, which is like how still these people in the church were sitting were like how statues are, like you see in life, like at an art museum. Teachers may be the somebodies, and they taught school to thousands of kids. But when it came to marching, they didn't have the courage. That's what people whispered. Reverend Reese noticed that the teachers were afraid. He knew what they were thinking. If we march, we could get arrested. We could go to jail. We could lose our jobs. Teachers had to be sensible. The white superintendent of schools hired them because they had the good sense not to march. But if the teachers didn't march, nothing would change. The Reverend needed a guarantee from the teachers, fast. He waved a sheet of paper in the air. If you will participate in a teacher's march, sign the list, he urged. Show up and show out. Reverend Reese explained that if both parents taught school, then only one would march. That way, somebody could take care of the kids if the other parent went to jail. So where did that leave Too Sweet? She taught school, but she was also a mother, the only parent, period. There was Joyce's grandmother who cooked the food, but Too Sweet earned the money for it. The first teachers to sign the list was Coach Lawrence Huggins. He was tired of telling kids about the Constitution, freedom and justice for all, but not defending it for himself. Another teacher signed up, and another until more than 100 teachers had pledged to march. Before the meeting was over, Too Sweet stood up. She signed her name to the list. The march was set for January 22nd. When Joyce woke up that morning, her mother kept busy in the kitchen. Without saying a word, Too Sweet put a peanut butter sandwich and a toothbrush in a brown paper bag. She needed those things in jail. The teachers had promised Reverend Reese they would march to the courthouse that afternoon, but Joyce grew worried. Would Too Sweet be coming home that night? Joyce grabbed her mother and held her tight. Later that day, Reverend Reese waited by the steps of the school with his list of names. Classes had ended, but the teachers weren't lined up. Had they changed their minds? Had they decided not to march? Reverend Reese wouldn't blame them if they had. All week, he's seen people getting arrested for trying to register to vote. Sheriff Clark herded them into an alley blocked with rope like they were cattle. He locked them in jail. Even Dr. King was beaten and bruised. If that could happen to somebody like Dr. King, would the teachers be brave enough to march? The wind rustled Reverend Reese's list of names, but he kept his eyes on the school doors. He had faith in the teachers. They'd given him the word. They signed the list, but he was standing alone. Suddenly, the doors burst open. One teacher walked out, then another. They held toothbrushes in the air, ready to go to jail for freedom. Soon, 104 teachers strutted down the steps, their toothbrushes gleaming like swords in the Selma sun. The teachers are going to march, kids shouted, rousing people from the neighborhood. Reverend Reese called the Coach Huggins to the front of the line. Coach was strong and fearless. He taught weightlifting to the football team and was in great shape. Reverend Reese wanted him close by in case there was trouble. Whenever anyone marched, there was bound to be trouble. Excuse me. Could you believe it? Grown-ups murmured, rushing from their homes. The teachers are going to march. Reverend Reese told the kids to wait at Brown Chapel, but Joyce paced nervously along. The sidewalk searching for Too Sweet. Would her mother be safe? If Too Sweet went to jail, they would be anything but free. If Too Sweet got fired from her job, they would be asking for handouts, food, clothing, everything. We're going to keep walking until we have reached the courthouse, Reverend Reed reminded the teachers. 2 by 2, they started marching. Reverend walked in front, his hands clenched in his trench coat pockets. Coach Huggins, tall and strong, Too Sweet, poised and defiant. Teachers young and old, clutching paper bags filled with their sandwiches for jail. The teachers didn't breathe a word. They didn't smile or sing freedom songs, but you could hear the courage in their leather shoes churning up the red dirt road and see the bravery behind their Sunday breeches catching the light of the sun. When the teachers reached the white section of town, red dirt changed to pavement. Crowds gathered like storm clouds. Shoekeepers hurried out of their stores. They glared at the teachers, trying to rattle their courage. What is that they won? They wondered. The teachers kept marching. What they wanted was what everyone had, the right to vote. As they turned into Alabama Avenue, the teachers spotted the 13 steps of green marble leading up to the courthouse. Sheriff Clark and his deputies stood at the top of those steps. When the sheriff saw so many teachers marching toward him, his eyes filled with rage. "We are here to register," Reverend Reese announced. "You can't make a plaything out of the corridors of this courthouse," the sheriff boomed. "You think you can make it at Disneyland?" "We have a right to be here," the Reverend insisted. "I will give you 1 minute to clear the steps," Clark roared, "or I'll have you all arrested." The teachers folded their arms. Some gripped their paper bags tighter, but they refused to move. 10 seconds, yelled the sheriff. Now, is this right what the sheriff is doing to him? No, not at all. It is not right. Reverend Reese and the teachers stood on the courthouse steps as still as Statue of Liberty. "Time's up. Now move it." Sheriff Clark and his deputies reached for their billy clubs. The sheriff jabbed Coach Huggins in the stomach, then Reverend Reese. The teachers fell down the steps like dominoes. Reverend Reese let the teachers back up again. Sheriff Clark grew so angry that he shoved the teachers down the steps even harder the second time. The school superintendent rushed out of the courthouse. He stared at the teachers. He could fire each and every one of them. Reverend Reese, Coach Huggins, Too Sweet. The teachers stared right back at him. They looked into the angry eyes of the Sheriff Clark. "Go ahead, Reverend Reese. Keep thinking. Arrest us. This wasn't Disneyland. This was real life. First-class citizens. That's what they were. Nothing less. The Constitution granted it. They stepped out for their right to vote, ready to be handcuffed, ready to lose their jobs for that right. But the superintendent fired every teacher lined up at the courthouse. Who would teach the students? He would have to shut down the schools, then he would be out of a job. Reverend Reese knew it. So did Sheriff Clark. The sheriff put away his billy club. The handcuffs stayed clasped to his waist. Reverend Reese and his triumphant idea and gained a glorious victory. Although the teachers didn't register to vote that day, the sheriff had the good sense not to arrest them, and the superintendent had the good sense not to fire them. With their heads held high, the teachers walked proudly to Brown Chapel. The church thundered with sounds of young voices singing freedom songs. "The teachers are coming back," somebody shouted. Everybody stood and sang louder. Joyce couldn't see the teachers, but she cheered anyway, for Reverend Reese, Coach Huggins, and for Too Sweet too. Too Sweet had to be there. "Did you see my teacher marching?" Kids gushed across wooden pews as soon as the singing stopped. Joyce spun around, searching for Too Sweet. When she found her, Joyce ran and hugged her mother and wouldn't let go. When Dr. King came back to preach that night, he praised Reverend Reese and the teachers for making civil rights history. No group of leaders has risked their jobs before by marching. "We were like giants," Reverend Reese said with a smile. "Great giants." Because Reverend Reese and the teachers marched, other groups started marching for their right to vote. Beauticians and barbers marched. Then the undertakers marched. Because Reverend Reese and the teachers marched, they became heroes to their students. It didn't matter that the kids were too young to vote. They intended to march for their teachers and their parents' right to vote. The students left school after roll call when the teachers turned their backs to gaze out the window. I'm going to get you your silver rights. They promised their new heroes. They marched to the courthouse with determination in their eyes, and ankle socks and sneakers on their feet. Joyce marched too, for her mother too sweet. The Selma marchers filled the jails by the thousands. Americans noticed. They wondered why respectable citizens in suits and dresses and school kids carrying books were jailed. The President of the United States noticed. He pushed for a new voting rights law. That summer of 1965, the Voting Rights Act passed. It made certain that nobody had to take a test just to vote. On one August morning, Reverend Reese, Too Sweet, and the other teachers walked down Alabama Avenue. They climbed the steps of the federal building across from the courthouse. Inside, there were no voting tests, no billy clubs, no alleys marked with rope. All the teachers had to do was sign their names and they were registered to vote. The first thing they did was vote Sheriff Clark out of office. All right, and that is the end of the book. Now let's all grab our plot diagrams and let's start filling them out, or if you didn't fully fill them out, let's get them filled out. So who can answer, what is the exposition for this? It is the African American voting rights. That was the main, beginning part of the story. Excuse me. And what was told throughout the story. Now, there was a lot of things. Let's jump up to the climax real quick. What do we think the middle would be of this book? Me personally, I would say, I would not say the march, because that to me led up to when MLK spoke in front of the people, because that motivated a bunch of the group into wanting to march that another day. So let's go to the rising action. So one thing we can put down is when Reverend Reed, or let's just put Reverend, or we can put R for short, marched to the courthouse. The courthouse. Another thing was when MLK came to talk to them. This was their first time that MLK talked to the people. Then you also have, we're going to put the, let's just say, we're going to use the word altercation, which is like when you confront someone, or you meet someone face to face to settle an argument. Altercation with sheriff. We'll just put W with a slash to make it short, with sheriff. Okay. All right, so now that we also have MLK spoke, let's put the second time to make it more exact. Okay, now let's go to the following action. There's not a lot for the following action. We'll add the second march, which with more people, we'll add that because that was a big detail into this. Then another one was when America noticed. We'll put America and the president noticed. Now, can someone tell me what the resolution was? Yeah, you are right. It is when African Americans got the right to vote. Okay. Now, students, I would like you to, on the back of your plot diagram, because you see, like, here's my plot diagram. On the back, I would like you to write a short summary of the story and your personal opinion on how this made a difference to you. So I'll give you guys the next few minutes to do that, and then we'll just wrap up by, you know, discussing it for a little bit. Then we're all finished with the book. So